Hello, Packers fans, and welcome into PackersNews.com. I'm Kassidy Hill, joined by Pete Dougherty, who is joining us live from London, where the Packers have fallen 27-22 to the New York Giants. Pete, this is now a Packers team that is 3-2 through 5 weeks. Technically outscored 17-2 in the second half, but really outscored 17-0. The Giants gave up a safety. It seemed like a complete collapse on every facet of the ball in the second half. I know you've just come from speaking with Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers. What's the sort of the sense with the Packers after this loss?
Yeah, it was, the atmosphere was really, really good. I don't know if it came across on TV or not, but the atmosphere was great. The vibe was excellent. It was a 65-35 Packers crowd. I mean, it was loud, much louder when things went well for them. So I think there was a sense of, letdown. Like all these people showed up and they laid that egg in the second half. It's they didn't have great explanations for what happened in the second half. I think they got away from who they are, and that 3-and-out series, 3 straight passes, was just a backbreaker for them. And their defense is just it's not the defense we thought we saw in training camp. They played pretty well last week. I thought maybe that was it. They had gotten over the hump, but Giants converted a lot of third downs. They ran the ball on them. The crossing patterns. The way you put it, it was a collapse on both sides of the ball in the second half.
On defense, especially, it felt like they were able to get push at times, but then penalties would negate a sack or even, I think, a fumble recovery at one point. And there were a lot of penalties that probably could have been avoided. I know that in the locker room, especially, Rasul Douglas talked about that a lot after the game. I mean, did it feel skewed that way towards you as well? How easy are these penalties cleaned up as well?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe they're just more prone to it, but they did. I think they lost 2 sacks and maybe a turnover to penalties. I mean, those are huge plays. And then a couple times they got a sack and they got them in second and long. It'd be second 14 or whatever, and they'd give up 8 or 9 yards on the second down, and then the first down on third down. So it's just bad defensive football. And Daniel Jones hurt him with his legs. They started in the second half. They started calling. I bet they called 3 or 4 draw plays for him, and he had some other plays where he scrambled. And Saquon Barkley's a really good back, and they just. I'm surprised from the defense I thought we saw in training camp. For the most part, hasn't really shown itself so far.
We have some questions coming in, Pete, and one of them about the defense. So I'm going to pop it up here for you. Lindell says, it's time to move on from Barry, and I believe that Goody needs to find another wide receiver as well. We'll get to the wide receiver in a second here. What do you feel is wrong with the team? The Joe Barry discourse has been very loud today, especially Pete. Does it feel like that at all to you that this might be coaching, or is it execution, or is it a little bit of both?
Well, yeah, it's that's one of the things to start trying to figure out here, especially if things don't turn around in the coming weeks. It's either the scheme is either mismatched with the players, or guys aren't playing as well. Now, like, I don't think Campbell has played as well as he did last year. It's fairly obvious. Rasul Douglas was going to have trouble doing what he did last year because those turnover plays, you knew he wasn't going to get all those this year, but he had a couple of those huge penalties, and they gave him a pretty good payday in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something to try to figure out. It doesn't look like Barry's adjusting real well, and I think in the NFL you got to have, even though you got to run your scheme, you got to have a lot of flexibility, and I'm starting to wonder if he has enough flexibility, whether it's either him or the scheme, to adapt to the players they have, and they're just not using them well enough. I think that's a legit question as to whether they're using the players they have in the way they should be used.
Seeing Adrian Amos back out there today after he spent all week in concussion protocol. Jair Alexander was back out. Jair Alexander was arguably one of their best defenders against Saquon Barkley throughout this day. Do you feel like having those two back out there, though, made a difference Is this a defense that needs to start building more around its talent versus its scheme, just to kind of build off what you were saying?
Yeah, and now that you said that, I'm thinking I don't remember any passes being completed on Alexander. Maybe one where they were in zone and the pass, the play was way in front of him and he came up and made the tackle.
And then he came up in run coverage too on Barkley.
Yeah, he made a really nice tackle on that one. So I think he probably was good in coverage, and that's why he didn't get targeted at all. So I think he helped them, but they were, Stokes is not off to a great start this season. He gave up a couple crossers. So that's something that we all have to, as we're looking at this team, have to kind of try to figure out for ourselves is it more, did some of us overrate these players, or are they not getting the most out of the talents that they have, and does the scheme need to be a little more flexible to do that?
It seems like they're playing a lot of bend, don't break on defense, but when you have the aggressiveness that they do in the personnel, it's almost just like, why? Why play that way?
And to some degree, there's there'll always be some of that in the NFL, but that's what that means is you at least get stops once they're at your end of the field and make them kick field goals instead of scoring touchdowns. So they were bend and break today.
Exactly.
They should be, you got to have turnovers. If you're a talented defense, that's one way that talent shows out is you force mistakes by rushing the quarterback, by having tight coverage, by going after the ball. And there were no turnovers today, right?
There were no turnovers. Correct. Yeah. It looked like there was one that Jared Reed had forced and recovered, but then that was negated by the holding call downfield. Yes. Are they kicking you out, Pete?
No, I kind of wondered there for a second, but no. I hope not.
I know. Tell him you still got a long night ahead of you. Let's switch to the offensive side of the ball, which, had a great first half and then just did absolutely nothing in the second half. A funny comment from Cody. Coach needs to have someone to let him know when they're getting away from the run too much. Pete, I know that was what you were asking about after the game. What was Matt LaFleur's response to why he got away from the run a little bit in the second half?
He didn't really directly answer it. They often don't after games. It was basically a lot of those play calls are what they call cans, which means it's a run call, but if the box is stacked, they just say a code or they give a signal and it switches to an automatic pass. So you can't. I think it means you can switch. That's the can comes from. And so he basically said, we have a lot of cans, and if they're loading the box, you can either run into the loaded box or you can throw the ball. And that was basically his answer to that question, that they were running it by the book. And I just wonder if on some of these calls, even though running it by the book, switching to a pass might be the right call with who they are and with the strength of their talent is on offense and the way they want to grind out games. Even if the by the book call is a pass, maybe you stick with the run. I basically asked Rodgers that. It wasn't quite that way, but he said, like, you talk about that 3-and-out series in the second half, 3 straight passes, and he said he really liked all 3 calls. And I said, I get that you like the calls, but with who you guys are, do you maybe just have to not do that and just run the ball more? And he was like, basically his answer was, maybe that's something we got to think about,
And that's essentially Mitchell's question here. He says, LaFleur has to be the head coach and tell Rodgers we are going to run the ball versus him passing, forcing the ball in short, tight windows inside the red zone, 10 yards or less. Do you feel like that's what's happening, Pete? Are the calls being made and then being changed by Rodgers more often than not?
There's no way for us to know. They never, ever answer those questions because they don't want other teams to be able to watch the game tape, the TV feeds and hear the call because, they have guys mic'd up and you can hear all the calls. So they don't want teams to figure that out. But it sure feels that way, doesn't it? I mean, it's just even before that 3-and-out, I think at halftime when I glanced at the stats, it was pass heavy, This team's just like they gotta. that's where their talent is. And this is the NFL. I get it. The NFL's not a run game, but I think with the way they're built, they got to run the ball even at times when, they normally would. They don't want to run it just because that's who they are. That's where their guys are. It changes the way defenses play, and maybe they can pop some of those runs. Aaron Jones is a really talented guy. He's a threat to break off a nice run every time he touches the ball.
And we heard Aaron Rodgers say earlier in the week that he told Matt LaFleur he wanted to air it out more and put on a show and kind of get back into the air and give these London fans something to really get excited about. However, here's the question I was looking for, the comment. RS1971 Camero says, looks like Rodgers' deep ball accuracy is starting to fade down the stretch. So we saw it in the first half, them kind of putting it through the air and it clicking. Faded in the second half. There were several deep balls. He went to Dobbs deep once. He went to Lazard deep a couple of times. He looked for Cobb deep. I think that one was in the end zone. And it just fell short. Some of that might have been, Giants defense holding them up. But those are passes that felt like Aaron Rodgers used to make look easy. And then now we're kind of seeing them fade down a little bit. Is that a product of receivers' speed, receivers getting on the same page, or could that be a product of Rodgers' age?
Kind of my gut feeling just watching it. We had great seats here. Like we were not far from the field at all. So we had really good view. The feeling I got was on most of those throws, it wasn't there. The guy wasn't open. Cobb, the throw to Cobb, he overthrew it. You're throwing to a really short receiver that far downfield. That ball would have to be just pinpoint perfect for him to be able to catch it. It's not like it's where Valdez-Scantling, for instance, had more length plus speed. You had a bigger bucket you can throw it in than when you're throwing the Cobb. So I question actually more the decisions to throw those. And Dobbs was kind of double covered on the one downfield. There was he kind of ran a post pattern. I just when he threw the ball and I looked down and I see two defensive backs there, I'm thinking, why is he throwing it there? I thought it was going to be picked at first,
right?
Because the safety, it looked like we had perfect view of it. It looked like the safety was tracking the ball great. I question the decision to throw to those guys more than the accuracy issues. I saw with Favre too. His accuracy stayed really good even when he got old. I'd have to see a lot more missed throws before I would say that it's an age thing. I'm not saying that's not a possibility because, Michael, it's a legit question with a 38-year-old quarterback. But my gut feeling is more he's just taking shots that really aren't there.
He was asked after the game about OBJ. Eddie says, here we need OBJ. There's been a couple other comments and questions in here about OBJ and going after that receiver. I know you were in Aaron Rodgers. Kind of take us through what he said. And I think one comment in here was after seeing this game, OBJ probably wouldn't want to come to Green Bay, but he might see an opportunity. But there's still a long way to go on his recovery road too.
Yeah, he's obviously got a big ego. He might love coming here because he can think he could step in and immediately be the guy. I'm still thinking he's a pipe dream for a couple reasons. One, he tore his ACL in the Super Bowl. That's February 10th or whatever.
Right.
So he's a long way from being able to play football. And even if he came back in 9 months, is he really going to be all that good for the first couple of months? The season's over. He won't be a year removed from the injury until the day of the Super Bowl, basically. Mm-hmm. So, I could be. Who knows? Maybe they will end up. I find it hard to believe that he would be the guy they'd go after. Plus, I still think he ends up in L.A. or New York. He's a huge personality, and he's going to want to be one of those big markets like that. But I am starting to. I was on the let this play out. I think these receivers have a real chance to be pretty good by the end of the year. A couple more games like this, and it's they may have to just go out and get somebody.
Yeah, somebody that can come in and compete right away. And with that in mind, Natasha asked, why not more crossing and comeback routes? Could that be the key to kind of get this offense moving, Pete? It's just, little dinks and dunks?
Yeah. Now, I'm sure that they'll argue, and there's probably a decent point, that if teams are really going to load up and crowd you and blitz you and cover one-on-one and all that, and that you got to every once in a while take a deep shot to keep them honest and to make them pay. But there is a lot to be said for the ball control passing. More screen. Did they throw any screens to the running back? I mean, I know they had a screen to Jones, but it was a bubble screen. He was lined up at receiver. So I mean, the screen game can really kill it. That's a way to get the ball in your back's hands with a little bit of space. So you wonder where all that is. And I just, those are their two best guys. They call anybody, call them last week winning ugly. Well, that's a lot better than losing while winging it.
Yeah. A question here from Jacob about Bakhtiari. He said Rodgers has had way too many wasted throws. He looks like he did in Mike McCarthy's final days. Also, David Bakhtiari looks pretty bad, doesn't he? Consistently giving up pressures. I would disagree with that, Pete, but I'm interested in your opinion.
I only watched him one-on-one 3 or 4 snaps. The 3 or 4 snaps I watched, he looked okay, but they ended up running the ball on 2 of them. So, I have zero opinion on that because I just didn't watch him enough. So sorry, Jacob. You probably watched him more snaps than I did, so I can't tell you how he played. So no help there. There was a throw or two on those when he took a couple of those deep shots, where I was kind of like, God, that just kind of felt like a what the hell throw. I mean, it just and he's probably not thinking that way, but it felt like it. And again, that's where I thought it was the decision making. I thought the deep shots that he took, the one of those it was okay. He just underthrew it, but at least a couple of the others, he threw the ball, and I'm wondering why is he throwing it there?
Let's go back to the defense real quick before we wrap up, Pete. Mitchell ask, is it time to sit Douglas due to him giving up big plays consecutively in each game? I would want to go back and look at the plays again, but this might be another one where I might disagree because he's given up some drives with penalties like he did today, which he took a lot of credit or he took a lot of responsibility for in the locker room after the game. But I feel like he's also one of your best he's also one of your best tacklers in the secondary, especially with him playing in that nickel. We've seen him drop so many runs for loss behind the line of scrimmage. I mean,
yeah,
what would you say there?
I think that's a really interesting question, Michael. Not to sit him, they're just paying him too much, and they need him on the field. I don't know that Nixon would be a better player than him, but it does make me wonder if they need to adjust mid-season and have when they have nickel, play Alexander in there. Maybe there's a reason to do that. Maybe they can use Alexander as a weapon, and maybe he's a blitzer because I don't know that Douglas ever blitzes. Right? I mean, have you seen Douglas blitz this year?
No.
Nothing. I don't remember him. It doesn't mean he hasn't, but I don't remember it. But it does make you wonder, like, are they misusing? Is that one of the ways they're misusing the personnel? Because Douglas, his tackling makes him great, as you said, for the nickel spot. But is he the type of coverage guy where the nickel slot's good for him? Alexander's more built for the coverage stuff. So that's one of the questions. They remember how they always talk about, well, we're going to play all these different guys in there. Well, they haven't. They played one guy in there until he got hurt, and then they used the other nickel in there. And 26 hasn't played in there. 23 hasn't played in there. So, they may have to rethink a lot of that stuff because they do not look like the defense. It's not like they've been terrible all season. They've had a lot of good moments and get stops, but they do not look like the defense that many of us thought that we sain training camp.
Not the world beaters
and the one that
purported to be.
Yeah, and how good they looked on paper coming in.
Right. Yeah, and in camp. I mean, they showed a really, really good defense in camp.
We saw it every day, right?
Saints. Yeah, but maybe that spoke more of the offense than anything. Patrick asked, I know it is really early.
Yeah, that's a real possibility.
Yeah, exactly. Patrick said, I know it is really early, but Watson can't stay on the field. Did he have an injury history in college? I feel like coming out of college, the main worry was the drops, but it does seem like he's just been incapable of staying on the field here through 5 weeks, Pete.
Yeah, well, I've got to go back and look. I don't remember that being an issue in the pre-draft work I did, or after they drafted him. So I got to double check on that, Patrick, but I will. But you're right. The rawness was more the question on him coming out.
Mm-hmm.
But he did. He had the knee scoped after the off-season work, so he missed most of camp. And then, didn't he? It was the first week or two in the season he hurt his hamstring, right?
Right. He missed Tampa Bay because of that.
Now he's back.
And then he left today with a hamstring.
Yeah. So this is beginning to turn into a disastrous. This is turning into a disastrous season for him from a guy who they traded 2 later second-round picks, prime picks, to get one guy, and they needed him to help them this season.
Something that he did help with today, and I want to bring up, Pete, because I don't think we've seen any questions about it yet, so I'm going to ask you. They put Christian Watson back there on kickoff returns, and one has to wonder if he would have been put on punt returns as well after Amari Rodgers fumbled that punt. But after Amari Rodgers fumbled the punt that the Packers were able to recover, the Giants didn't punt again until they took the intentional safety. So, and then by then Christian Watson was hurt as well. But Christian Watson was used on kickoff returns today. Could we start to see, if Watson stays healthy, a shift here on special teams?
So think back to camp. Was he ever, because they always have, some days they'd have 3 guys catching punts. Sometimes it'd be 5 or 6.
Well,
was he
a
ever
lot
back
of
there on
camp
that?
was when he was hurt.
Yeah, all right. That's right. So he wasn't even practicing. I'm just taking a wild guess here. And again, need to see if he did it any in college. But he's a 6'4" guy who's a strider. And punt returners are generally smaller, quicker guys because you got to change direction on a dime. Kick return, you have 15 yards to build up speed and hit a seam hard. So he doesn't strike me as a punt returner. But who's the guy that they signed to the practice squad? Was last week or the week before? He had a lot of return experience. The cornerback.
Right. He used to play.
I'm blanking on his name. My apologies, but he did a lot of kickoff returns. But maybe he could return punts too, and maybe they'll end up activating him at some point this season. That's just,
It looks like Watson has taken over the kick return job as long as he stays healthy, if nothing else.
Yeah, I wonder now with this hamstring, do they have to take him off that just because they don't want him pulling a hamstring, returning a kickoff?
That's a very good possibility. And someone else they used a lot in camp and into preseason was Romeo Doubs, but they probably don't want to risk putting him back there now.
Yeah, I would think they'd be really hesitant. But, they addressed a bunch of things in the offseason. But one thing they didn't was drafting a return man, a guy who that's what he does.
Right.
And they haven't had a good return guy for since, 15 years probably here.
With who, Howard or even Cobb?
Well, Howard was the 90. I guess so. It's a little. Yeah, Cobb was a rookie in 11. So, but he did some returning. So yeah, 11 and 12 right in there.
Mm-hmm. Could it be worth putting Cobb back there again? I mean, I know he's
too slow. I think.
But he wouldn't make a bad decision.
No, well, he wouldn't. Although remember, they put him back there that was last year, right, in the playoff
right,
game.
They benched.
And he fumbled.
Benched Amari Rodgers and they put Cobb in.
Remember, he dropped
I don't remember him playing in the playoff.
He dropped a catch on a punt, and they lost the punt. They turned it over. So, but you're right. I mean, he would be more sure-handed and better decision maker. So, yeah, actually, if it comes to the point where they don't trust Amari Rodgers to do it, then yeah, it would have been like when they put. I think it was they used late in Charles Woodson's career. They put him back there just because they trusted him to catch it. And as an all-time great as he was, by the time he was 36 years old, he wasn't a very good punt returner anymore. But they still stuck him back there because they said, at least he's going to catch the ball. Again, first rule, do no harm, right?
Right.
So, yeah, if it comes to that, maybe they will stick Cobb back there just to, at least make sure they catch the ball.
This is an interesting question from Reva. If we lose playoffs, or maybe not even make it to the playoffs, are any coaches on the hot seat? Is that a reaction? Is that too reactionary 5 weeks in, or is it fair to go ahead and ask that question, Pete?
Well, it'll be a really fair if the part plays out and they don't make the playoffs, then yeah, I could see assistant coaches getting fired. Happened with under Mike McCarthy numerous times. So sure, it would all be in play.
And then I'm gonna wrap it up here with Jacob's question. Why do they keep going 3 wide when their wide receivers are their biggest weaknesses? Why not go heavy in the second half? I don't know. We've kind of touched on that already, but this is also what you're writing on, Pete. So I'm just going to let you take us home with this. I think we might have lost Pete there. Yep, I think we're losing Pete there from London. We'll give him a second and see if he does hop back in here. But if not, as I said, Pete is going to have a column on that subject on PackersNews.com. And then Tom Silverstein as well will have his column. And then Ryan Wood is looking at the defensive struggles today, specifically in relation to the penalties and what they were able to give the Giants back in penalties and just bad decision making on defense. And then I'll be looking at special teams and maybe some of the decisions that could be coming down the pipe there. We will continue to have full coverage on PackersNews.com, wrapping up the Packers' loss to the Giants, including Ryan and Pete's coverage from London before they head back home tomorrow. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll try to get to them and the replies here. In the meantime, thank you all for joining us. We will see you next time on PackersNews.com.